You know, people always tell you your first love leaves a mark. They just never tell you how deep it can cut when the person you once trusted with your entire heart learns how to use that heart as a weapon. I used to believe love, the real kind, the fairy tale kind, could survive anything. Distance, time, change, even life itself. I believed it because he made me believe it. Ethan Carter. My high school sweetheart. My first kiss behind the old bleachers. My prom date. My first everything. The boy who swore under a half-broken streetlight that he'd love me forever. And for a long time, thought he meant it. It's funny, I can still smell that night if I close my eyes. The wet pavement after the rain, the faint scent of gasoline from passing cars, the way his jacket, that oversized Letterman jacket, smelled like soap and teenage sweat and something that felt like safety. And maybe that's why I held on to him so long after the safety was gone, because I kept chasing that smell, that illusion of warmth. We met when I was 16 and I swear I thought the world began and ended with him. He was loud and confident, the kind of boy who could talk his way out of detention and into anyone's good graces. Me. I was quiet. The kind of girl who blended into walls. I wrote stories no one read, kept journals under my mattress, and believed that if I loved someone hard enough I could fix anything. You know, that teenage kind of hope that doesn't know what it's up against. When we graduated, he stayed behind a year. Said he wasn't ready for college yet. I went to a small university 2 hours away and he'd drive up on weekends. He'd bring flowers sometimes or cheap pizza or just himself. And that was enough. Because I loved him. Because at 19 love was supposed to be enough. But I remember one weekend so vividly. It was fall. The air was crisp, my dorm smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. He'd been quiet all night, sitting on my twin bed with his hands tucked in his hoodie pocket. I asked what was wrong and he just shrugged, said, "You've changed, Em." That was the first time he called me that, like, Emily, was too much effort. Like shortening me somehow made me easier to handle. He said I was different. Too busy, too ambitious. That I didn't need him anymore. And I laughed. God, I laughed. Because how could I not need the person I'd built my entire world around? But that night planted a seed. And like all bad seeds, it grew quietly underground until it cracked everything open. Years later, I'd look back and see how many small warnings I ignored. The jealousy that disguised itself as protectiveness. The way he'd say, "I just worry about you," when what he meant was, "I want to control you." The guilt trips when I spent time with friends. The subtle digs about my clothes, my laugh, my voice, as if my existence had started to embarrass him. But back then it all felt like love. Because when you're young, you mistake intensity for passion. You mistake possession for devotion. And before you know it, you're apologizing for things you didn't even do, just to keep the peace. When he finally proposed, it wasn't the movie moment I'd imagined as a girl. We were sitting in his car outside my parents' house on Christmas Eve. Snow was falling, the windows were fogged, and he pulled a small box from his jacket. No speech. No candlelight. Just, "Let's do it, Tim. Let's get married." And something in me, that small trembling voice that still remembered how to say no, wanted to ask why now. But I didn't. Because after 5 years, what else was there to do but say yes? The wedding was simple. White roses. A church that smelled like wax and dust and nostalgia. My mother crying in the front row. My father gripping my hand before letting it go. When I walked down that aisle, I swear my heart wasn't racing with excitement. It was trembling, like it knew something I didn't yet. But fear looks a lot like butterflies when you're trying to convince yourself you're happy. Everyone told us we were perfect. High school sweethearts. Still together. So rare these days. And I smiled because that's what you do when people tell you how lucky you are, even if you feel like you're standing on a ledge. At first, married life felt calm. Predictable. Ethan got a job at his uncle's garage. I worked at a local paper, writing human interest pieces and weekend columns that maybe 50 people read. We rented a small apartment, 2 rooms, 1 leaky faucet, a view of the parking lot. But it was ours. And for a while, that was enough. Until it wasn't. The first fight came 6 months in. I'd gotten an offer to write full-time, a promotion, more pay, better exposure. He didn't congratulate me. He just stared at his plate and said, "So what, you'll be gone all the time now?" It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the tone. The resentment underneath. Like my success was a personal betrayal. I told myself it was just insecurity, that he'd adjust. But then came the late nights. The silent dinners. The accusations. He'd scroll through my phone when he thought I was asleep. He'd show up at my office just to check in. And when I asked him why he didn't trust me, he said, "Because I know how men look at you." As if being loved by him meant I had to shrink myself to make him feel big enough. The thing about slow emotional decay is that it doesn't scream. It whispers. You start by making small compromises. Fewer nights out, fewer friends, fewer opinions. Until one day you wake up and realize you've become a version of yourself you don't recognize. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, brushing my hair and not recognizing the woman looking back. Her eyes were dull. Her smile mechanical. She was wearing a sweatshirt she didn't even like. And I thought, when did I start disappearing? He was kind, sometimes. And that's what makes it confusing. Because the kindness keeps you hoping. Keeps you tied. You think, see, he can still be good. He can still love me. And that one good day is enough to erase the 6 bad ones before it. But love shouldn't have to hurt this way. And deep down, I knew it. One night, 2 years into our marriage, I came home from work to find him waiting in the dark. The TV was off. The air was heavy. I could smell whiskey. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. Just asked in that cold, level tone, "Who's Daniel?" Daniel was a coworker. Married. Older. Harmless. We'd been assigned to the same feature. I tried to explain, but he wasn't listening. He never really listened. He stood up, grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to bruise but hard enough to frighten. And in that silence, that awful suspended silence, something inside me broke. Not the kind of break that's loud or final. The quiet kind. The kind that means you've stopped fighting. He didn't hit me. But I think sometimes words bruise deeper than hands ever could. When he finally let go, he muttered, "You're making me crazy, Em. Don't make me crazy." And I remember whispering, "Then don't make me small." He didn't answer. He just left. And I sat there in the dark with the sound of the refrigerator humming behind me, thinking maybe this is my fault. Because that's what emotional erosion does. It convinces you the collapse is you're doing. That night was the beginning of the end. But endings like love take their time. I wish I could say I walked away right then, that I had some sudden burst of courage and packed my bags. But I didn't. I stayed. For another year. Because it's hard to leave when you've built your entire identity around someone else's approval. There were good days still. Days where he'd bring me coffee, touch my cheek, apologize for getting carried away. And I'd believe him. Because believing hurt less than the truth. But love that lives in apology will always die in resentment. By the time I realized that, it was too late to pretend anymore. I remember the night I decided I couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a fight. It was quiet, like the way snow falls on empty streets. He was asleep, snoring softly beside me. The moonlight was spilling across the floor, catching the edge of our wedding photo on the dresser. We looked so young in that picture. So naive. I reached out and touched the glass, tracing the smile I didn't recognize anymore. And then I thought, if I stay I'll never get her back, the girl in that photo. The one who used to write stories. The one who used to laugh until her stomach hurt. The one who still believed love meant freedom, not fear. So I got up. I didn't take much. Just a bag, my notebook and my car keys. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. People like to ask when love turns to hate. I think for me it never did. I didn't hate Ethan. I pitied him. Because he never learned the difference between loving someone and owning them. And maybe that's why I stayed as long as I did. Because I kept thinking if I just loved him enough, he'd learn. But love doesn't fix people. It reveals them. And what I saw in the end was a man too afraid of losing control to ever truly love anyone. When I drove away that night, the sky was still dark. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The radio was off. The world was silent. But somewhere between the highway signs and the sunrise, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The smallest flicker of peace. It wasn't freedom yet. But it was the beginning of it. And beginnings, even broken ones, are sacred. You know, I still keep that wedding photo. Not out of sentiment but as a reminder. Because that girl, the one smiling in lace and hope, she didn't know how strong she'd have to become. She didn't know that love could turn into a battlefield. But she learned. And that's where this story really begins. Because walking away isn't the end. It's the first painful step toward remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. The funny thing about leaving isn't the act itself. It's the silence that follows. The silence that greets you when you close the door for the last time, when your phone stops lighting up, when your name stops being called from another room. That silence, it's both freedom and grief. And you don't really know which one you're feeling until it hits you all at once. The morning after I left Ethan, I parked my car in front of an old motel off the interstate. One of those places where the neon sign buzzes even in daylight, and the sheets smell faintly like bleach and rain. I checked in under my maiden name, Emily Rose. The woman at the front desk didn't even look up when I handed her the cash. She just slid a key across the counter and said, "Room 12, ground floor." I still remember that room. The carpet was this ugly green, stained in patches. The air conditioner rattled like it was struggling to breathe. There was a single chair in the corner, and a mirror that warped your reflection just enough to make you look like someone else. Maybe that's why I stared into it for so long, trying to see who I'd become. It wasn't courage that brought me there. It was exhaustion. Years of trying to prove my worth to someone who'd long stopped seeing it. And as I stood there staring at my reflection, it hit me, I didn't know how to exist without him anymore. It's terrifying when your freedom feels like someone else's absence. I stayed in that motel for 3 days. Didn't tell my parents, didn't answer my phone. Just existed. Ate vending machine chips. Slept in fits. Watched reruns of shows I didn't care about. Grief isn't always loud, you know. Sometimes it's quiet and routine. It's brushing your teeth and realizing you don't have to leave the light on for someone else. It's waking up in a bed that finally feels too big. It's eating alone. Not because you want to, but because you don't know how to eat with anyone anymore. By the 3rd day, I drove to my friend Lena's house. She was one of the few people I'd drifted from because Ethan never liked her energy. She opened the door, saw me on her porch with swollen eyes and a half-empty duffel bag, and didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me in and said, "You're safe here." I think that's the first time I cried for real. Not the quiet, careful crying I did in bathrooms and cars. The kind that rips out of you raw and ugly. She didn't try to fix it. Just sat next to me while I broke apart on her couch. That's what real love looks like. It doesn't demand you to be okay. It lets you fall apart until you're ready to stand again. For the first few months I was a ghost of myself. I tried to work, but my words came out hollow. Every story I wrote felt like it belonged to someone else. My boss, a gentle woman named Harriet, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Take time, Emily. Don't try to rush back into being normal. Normal isn't real. Healing is." So I did. I took a leave of absence. Spent mornings walking through the park near Lena's place. There was a bench near the pond where ducks gathered every morning. I'd sit there with my coffee wrapped in an old cardigan, watching strangers walk their dogs, watching life continue without me. And I realized, the world doesn't stop when your heart breaks. It just keeps spinning, waiting for you to decide when to step back in. The loneliness came in waves. Sometimes it was manageable, just a whisper in the background. Other times it hit like a flood. I'd hear a song we used to play in the car or see couples laughing in a cafe, and suddenly I'd be drowning again. And I hated that part of me still missed him. Because how do you miss someone who made you feel so small? How do you long for the very person you had to escape to survive? That's when I realized, missing someone isn't the same as wanting them back. It's mourning the version of yourself that existed when they loved you. And that version, she deserved better. One afternoon I went back to our apartment. I told myself it was to collect the last of my things. The notebooks, some old photos, my favorite coffee mug. But really it was to see if he'd changed. The door was unlocked. The air inside was stale, heavy. The couch was still dented where he always sat. There was a new bottle of whiskey on the table. Half empty. He wasn't home. But his shadow still was. In the smell of his cologne, in the faint hum of the refrigerator, in the silence that lingered after every memory. I stood there for a long time holding that coffee mug. It had a crack running through the handle. And I thought, maybe that's what we were. Still holding shape but too fractured to function. So I left the key on the counter. Didn't write a note. Didn't take anything. Because I finally understood, closure doesn't come from answers. Comes from leaving anyway. I moved into a tiny studio downtown. It wasn't much. A single window, a squeaky floor, a kitchen the size of a closet. But it was mine. Mine to decorate, mine to clean, mine to fall apart in without apology. And for the first time in years I started writing again. Not for work. For me. Stories about women who left. Who survived. who rebuilt themselves from the ruins. Some nights I'd write until dawn, the city humming outside my window, and I'd think, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not loud or dramatic. Just quiet, steady reclamation. But healing doesn't come without guilt. Because even when you walk away from pain, there's a part of you that still wonders if you were the villain in someone else's story. I used to stare at my reflection and ask, was I cruel for leaving? Did I break him too? And then I'd remember all the nights I cried in silence, all the apologies I made for existing, all the ways I folded myself small just to fit inside his comfort. No, I didn't break him. I just stopped letting him break me. A few months later I ran into him. It wasn't planned. I was coming out of a bookstore downtown, arms full of secondhand novels, when I heard someone call my name. I froze. It was him, Ethan. He looked older, tired. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes dim. For a second I forgot how to breathe. He smiled, that same disarming boyish smile that once could undo me. Said, "You look good. I've missed you." And I just stood there, clutching my books like armor. His part of me wanted to believe him. To fall into old patterns. But another part, the part that had slept in that ugly motel room, the part that learned to walk alone in the park, the part that found her voice again, she whispered, "Don't you dare." I told him I hoped he was doing well. He nodded, said he'd quit drinking, started therapy, trying to figure things out. Maybe he had. Maybe he was finally learning. But I knew it wasn't my responsibility to witness that growth. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. Then I said goodbye. And as I walked away, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt light. Like I'd finally set something down I didn't even know I was carrying. That night I called Lena. Told her I'd seen him. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "You okay?" And I realized I was not perfect, not healed, but okay. And sometimes that's all the closure you need. There's something strange about rebuilding your life in your 30s. You expect fireworks, reinvention, some grand revelation. But most days it's just peace. Morning coffee that doesn't taste like compromise. Music playing because you want to hear it, not because someone else does. Waking up without that knot in your chest. I learned to enjoy my own company again. Started taking photography classes, joined a small writing group. Made new friends who didn't know the version of me that flinched when doors closed too hard. I even learned to laugh again, not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that fills a room and doesn't ask for permission. Slowly, I became someone I actually liked being alone with. But healing isn't linear. There were still nights I'd wake up gasping, still songs I couldn't listen to without tears. Still moments where I'd reach for my phone to text him, only to remember why I couldn't. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't vanish when you leave the house that caused it. It follows you in whispers, in echoes, in the smallest triggers. But each time you survive those echoes, you get a little stronger. A little steadier. A little more you. One night I found an old notebook, the one I used to hide under my mattress in high school. Inside were stories I'd written about love. Perfect, untouchable love. The kind that never faltered, never broke, never hurt. I laughed when I read them. Not because they were naive, but because they were honest. That was who I was before the world taught me that love could also be cruel. And instead of throwing the notebook away, I wrote something new in the back. I am not the same girl who believed love was meant to save me. But I am proud of the woman who learned it was meant to free me. I think that's when I finally understood what healing really meant. It's not about forgetting. It's not about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about carrying it differently, learning how to hold your scars without letting them define you. Ethan will always be a part of my story. Not the villain. Not the monster. Just the man who showed me what I would never accept again. And maybe that's the gift hidden in the wreckage. The clarity that only comes after the storm. There are days I still wonder what might have happened if we'd met later. Older, wiser, calmer. But then I remember, the girl I was back then needed to learn how to save herself first. Because love, real love, starts there. In the quiet decision to stop chasing people who make you forget your own name. And that's where I'll leave you for now. Because the next part isn't about loss anymore. It's about what happens after. When the heart, bruised and tired as it is, learns to open again, not to someone else first, but to life itself. Love doesn't need proof. It just needs presence. But even then I was honest. I told him one night, under the quiet hum of city lights, that I still carried pieces of someone else's shadow. That I was still learning to trust silence again. He said, "That's okay. I'm not here to replace your past. Just to remind you it doesn't own your future." And that one sentence became a kind of mantra for me. Because it's true. Healing doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means learning to live fully despite it. One day I went back to my hometown, the first time in almost a decade. The streets looked smaller, the trees older, the faces mostly unfamiliar. But the house I grew up in still had the same white porch, the same chipping paint. I sat there on the steps, drinking from a thermos of coffee, and thought about the girl I used to be. The one who wrote stories about forever, who believed love was a finish line. And I wanted to tell her so many things. That forever isn't always a promise. That sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is let go. That love doesn't end when someone breaks you. It just changes form. It becomes resilience. It becomes the strength to say, "This time I choose myself." I saw Ethan once more years after that bookstore moment. It was at a mutual friend's wedding. He was with someone, a quiet woman with kind eyes. When he saw me he smiled. Not the smug kind, not the apologetic kind. Just human. We didn't talk long. He said he was sorry. Not for one thing but for everything. And for the first time I could hear it, really hear it, without the ache of wanting anything back. I told him I forgave him. Not because he earned it, but because I finally needed to stop carrying him inside me. Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's setting yourself free from being tethered to their mistakes. We said goodbye and that was it. No tears. No relapses. Just two people who once tried and failed, standing in the same air without bitterness. And that felt like peace. Today when I tell my story, people sometimes ask how I can speak about it without breaking down. And the truth is, I still do. Sometimes. When I read certain passages aloud, my voice still trembles. Because healing doesn't mean the pain is gone. It means the pain finally has a place to rest. But I tell it anyway. Because there's always someone in the audience. Some woman sitting quietly, hands folded, eyes glassy, who needs to hear that leaving isn't failure. That walking away from someone who made you feel small isn't giving up. It's surviving. And survival, though messy and painful, is its own kind of grace. I used to think my story was about heartbreak. But now I see it's about returning to myself. Because love, real love, doesn't just come from someone else's arms. It comes from the mornings you get up even when it hurts. From forgiving yourself for staying too long. From learning to be your own safe place. If I could speak to that girl standing under the broken streetlight, the one who believed forever meant never leaving, I'd tell her this. You will love again. Not like before, recklessly, blindly. But deeper. Softer. You will love in a way that feels like breathing, not gasping. And it will start with you. I married my high school sweetheart and he became my worst enemy. But through the wreckage he left behind, I found the version of myself I'd buried. The woman who laughs again. Who writes again. Who loves again. Not perfectly. Not fearlessly. But fully, and that's enough. Because sometimes the best thing we can do with our pain is turn it into something that helps someone else heal too. And if my story does that for even one person tonight, then maybe every scar was worth it.